All right, so this panel, From Proposal to Fabrication, is part of the body of the symposium. So public art has evolved into an art practice with multifaceted impact and boundless form. So the fabricator plays an essential role in achieving positive outcomes. So our two panelists today are multi-talented and have worked on a range of projects in public art. So we have Howard Connolly, whose name has been floating around throughout the entire symposium. Very talented fabricator, sculptor, and director of Howard Connolly Design. And also Wesley Clark, another talented artist and installer. So can we give a round of applause first for Howard, who'll start the conversation? Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation, and it's quite an honor to be up here to talk about what happens at this little place behind my house, which is my studio. I guess because I'm so nervous, I just have to go straight to slides, and this is a project for DOE that the whole idea here between proposal to fabrication I was thinking about. There was the conceptual point, of course, of trying to figure out what would work for this space, but thanks to Rhonda and Barbara Johnson and Nehemiah Dixon, they came across a couple drawings in their children's art program that they thought were interesting, and I tried to incorporate them very directly into a sculpture for the front of the DOE building. So here's the confluence, these two flowers together, and it rotates in the wind as a wind vane. And here's like a 3D version of that, just to draw and see if that was acceptable. And part of the proposal project was walking around the building and wondering what we're going to do where. So that was a day of just looking at the other side of the building, look at the atrium, look at the outside, the parking lot, where and why, what is going to work best. So that's what we did one day, and sort of agreed on this island out in front, that was a good place for a colorful presence of art in the midst of a very businessy district, where when you entered it there was a lot of darkened windows and dark brick and not a lot of color. So we wanted to go that direction, and I think and we all agreed that this was something that definitely was going to stand out in this environment. Krista Schuler has donated these areas here, which were aluminum printed photographs of her environmental work, and we wanted to integrate these into an environmental sculpture. So this was my effort to put them in a place that was prominent, and to also use them as feathers in the wind vane. So it's going to activate this sculpture in the wind. Just part of the building process at my studio. It was fairly tall, so we had to invent something larger, which is pretty constant, that there's a making of new tools. I'm thinking back to the MGM project with Robert's photographs. I had to make a tool to bend his photographs into a crinkle shape. And we experimented with that, to try to figure out what the materials could handle as far as how much crinkle, and came up with something that seemed to work for the project. And even on that project, I have to say about the proposal and the fabrication link, that several times in the proposal I had to write in that these were not self-supporting, and then there was an issue with installing, and that they're going to need all this bulwarking behind them to support them, to make them really work. And that was what's the right word? It was when
Tension.
what's that?
Tension?
attention because there was non-agreement on this. But when it was actually going to be installed, it was very apparent that it needed all kinds of support. So luckily we had documentation saying, we'll do what you're asking us to, but from all I can tell here, we're going to need to do something more to make it work. So that's important stuff about the proposal, is to think about those kinds of areas. I don't know if there's anything else in there to see. Let's go on. So there's the finished thing, and it's like 21-foot tall thing that hopefully suits your purposes and all that. This is an early start to my introduction to the Discovery Channel. Was they had a retail flagship store down in DC, and this was an early stage of design and proposal for me where our invoices would say shark, $5,000. And so it was like so general that it didn't cover anything, or giant dinosaur foot, $5,000. So it was before I really learned that you have to itemize every single thing in contingency plan that's going on in there, to say, like, well, to carve it's this, to put the finish on this, and if you don't like the finish, to change the finish would be something else. But now the invoices, or at least the proposals, have a lot of line items, and that is the most important thing I've learned, maybe, as far as trying to make money to do this again, is to put a lot of line items in every proposal. And then it's easier, when the thing says shark 5,000, then you're like, well, I really would like to put real shark's teeth in this thing, and then you're like, oh, they cost $1,000, or that's an interesting learning curve. And if you have it written out every single line, that is certainly helpful to be like, if you want real shark's teeth, that's $1,000 more. If you want little pieces of paper, we could probably do that and let the client decide that. So here's just a bunch of random things, a lot of foam, styrene. This was for the Sony Metreon in San Francisco. Discovery gave me and my partner Matt, in our business, we had a commercial art business down in Alexandria for a lot of years, and they gave us photographs, and we fashioned them into relief, and they put them on buildings. So the next thing for Discovery after the flagship was they built something in Silver Spring. And for this thing in Silver Spring, they wanted a playground with a Steve Irwin themed playground. So this was an interesting thing, was I had no part in this job. I was brought in as a consultant to talk about large crocodiles because I'm an expert. And they were going to build a fiberglass walking, it's a walker type thing for toddlers. So there's, believe it or not, there's plenty of research on what a toddler needs to really walk correctly. So we had the experts come in. They told us it needs about this kind of slope, and it has variation and all this interesting stuff we learned. So I went from consultant to, I was volunteering for my friend, and I went to the meeting to talk about the crocodile. And then when I walked out of the meeting, pretty much I got the whole job, and I started converting the gazebo, and then we built an entry arch out of black locust. And here's a whole team of friends that walked the crocodile in, which was 3,000 pounds. So we cut down the tree, we brought it to the mill, we had the wood dried, we cut it up, and then my friend Robert Jones, he's a wood master, so I hired him to help me build all these things I just casually drew, and he drew them so they actually could be built. And he put together all the crocodile pieces out of the local wood, and then I came in and carved it and painted it in this Aboriginal sort of style as a nod towards Steve Irwin. And as a stainless steel base, there's us cutting down the tree. And after that job at Discovery, they had emergency situation of a shooter entered the building and they wanted to build a security fence, but they wanted a percentage of art kind of thing for making the fence look integrated to the building more than just a giant security fence. So this initial concept of mine was to go abstract and have different forms of maybe fire, water, air type thing. And they're like, no, we're Discovery Channel. You need to have dinosaurs, tigers, and I'm like, fine. So we drew some sketches there. And then after back and forth for a while, finally came up with these last shuttle shark dinosaur thing. And the interesting thing about this is longevity in art is always like something we're always talking about. How is this going to last? How long should it last? Da, da, da. This was the first project I had that absolutely had to be breakaway. They were terrified that someone was going to climb on the dinosaur and leap over the fence and endanger the children in the playground. So this is a breakaway sculpture, which is, I just love the fact that we had to design something like this, but it only has 2 little aluminum rivets holding the whole thing, each piece together. And so we basically took aluminum, bent little areas. I can't even see them in these photographs, but basically turned one angle 90 degrees, and then it's riveted to the fence. And they do pull off, and luckily after almost 10 years now, nothing bad has happened. They actually stayed up, which they were supposed to, but still be able to be broken. This is the last slide, and it's just other projects I've designed and built for other. I do a lot of restaurant decor, and there's some public art here. So I have a hanging sculpture called The Necklace, and it's got a piece of sandstone from my hometown in Colorado, and all aluminum tubing up in the air. And then I did stainless steel handrails because the contractor, the price was too high, so I had to come in and do something fancy for less. It's crazy, but that's what happened there. This is JBG Properties down on 8th Street in DC. A fantastic job for me. It had a lot of drawing and conceptual ideas, and I got paid well for designing. So usually for drawing and coming up with ideas and engineering the project, it's $150 an hour. And then if I'm working in the studio and building the thing, it's somewhere around $100 an hour to build these things. This was one of the first projects I did that had no drawings or ideas beforehand. It was all on spec. But I had some restaurant owners that believed in me from Succotash Restaurant, and they wanted a Deborah Butterfield sculpture, and I said I could copy her, but let's not. Let's combine your idea of having a horsey themed thing and some New Orleans music themed thing. And I came up with this piano horse. So it's 2 grand pianos made into a horse. And we made models and put the models together. And then I photographed the models and said, hey, is this match what you're hoping? And we built that. So that was a different way to propose a sculpture. Usually we're drawing and we're coming up with a concept for them. But this was very much just like, I'm going to make a horse out of pianos. And it seemed to work, so that was very nice. This is more styrene carving, and it was just something it's one of the few things I've just done on spec because I wanted to, and I had a lot of foam carving experience. But there's not a lot of funds for me to do almost anything voluntarily as far as pro bono. I'm probably out of time, so.
No, you're good.
I'm good.
Thank you, Howard. Okay. So next we're going to hear from Wesley Clark.
All right. So my intro into public art is fairly recent, I feel, probably in the past 4 or 5 years maybe. And this piece here is actually my first temporary public sculpture, but only realized that I'd actually been doing it for a little bit longer than realizing once speaking with another public artist and understanding. She kind of put it into my frame that public art is art accessed by the people, not necessarily funded by the people. by the public. And while of course there is, but a lot more of it is corporate. And so I've been doing these corporate projects for a while, not really thinking of them as public art. But so this one here is probably the first where I had to do a proposal for, and got it. And more importantly, one of the huge aspects when I think about the work is finding yourself in it, finding your own process in the work. And this was for the American Alliance of American Museums, put on what was it, Lincoln? What's it called? The Lincoln's Cottage. Thank you. I couldn't think of that last word, cottage. And so thanks to Martha Jackson Jarvis, she helped me get that and understand how to go about it. So this is an example of some of the earlier stuff I was doing as far as for storefronts, and where that's doing some fabrication with again insulation foam, and the previous one was another year. I'd been doing this, kind of year after year, changing the colors for the paint store, the color of the year. And so we were taking their colors and making pieces out of it. And my wife and I were collaborating on these projects, actually. So that's her reflection in the window. And she actually did this piece with my doing a few of the background details, construction and things like that. This one, they wanted a Calderesque kind of deal, which I was pretty psyched about because I had never done it before, and I'd never done a mobile, and got to play with my welder that I'd bought and been wanting to do. Let's see, and so yeah, back to this one. So a huge aspect with this piece here was, again, inserting my voice and my work and my process into it. And for my own private work, I'm doing a lot with making things look old, have a history to them. And so going along with the idea of the museum, it was, taking the various aspects of a museum, a history museum, science museum, fine arts museum, and, we put them into the various colors, right, and then mixed them up. And then just really you got the chance to kind of see how these various aspects of museums play just from the various images, and how one thing connects to another, how science relates to art through, this person to that person, etc. Materials. A huge aspect of this, it was temporary. I work in wood, so we went with wood, knowing that it wasn't going to be, I didn't have the funding for metal at the time or anything. But understanding that it was going to, face the elements, and trying to make sure I was kind of building for that. But one thing, what happened in particular, and basically I'm just going to kind of talk about the struggles that I've had through various projects. And this one was realizing, or not thinking about, at the last second of installation, we kind of shifted the piece closer to the cottage, and the ground wasn't quite as level there. And so in the midst of it, we built it so that it could spin, but once the ground was off kilter, and then it rained some and the wood swelled, now it was kind of like this, and now it wouldn't keep turning was what happened there. So learning experience. That was good. So this too is another example. This piece is in a high school in Northeast DC. And again, we're trying to integrate what I was doing personally, my personal work, into a public art call. And one of those things is where I happen to have been working with crossword puzzles in my private work, and so this is an example of what I was doing, then making this happen, where you had to solve the crossword puzzle. You had to solve it to get a Malcolm X quote with all the various clues on the side, and for the middle one, it was a word find. And so you're already starting off with his quote already circled, and just kind of thinking about who we're looking at, who's going to be engaging with the work. It being in a school, right, student body. How can you engage the students and the teachers with what they're seeing in the hallways, and at the same time teaching them, something about Malcolm X in this case, and some of the other words in there, are all things that we're dealing with, school-related things that you want to teach kids and empower them with. Had to make sure that there weren't any accidental words you didn't want, which did happen a few times. So we had to adjust, the puzzle, and then lastly, this was actually, and also the first time working with a fabricator where for me is essentially making this more of a collaborative process. And this is just more install shots here. And so here, I didn't do this at home. I had to, go outsource it. And in fact, I pretty much had outsourced the entire project. And so this is the puzzle portion being built. And sometimes, there's a lot of experimentation happening. And, the guy who I was working with had never done anything like this, but he had the facilities to do it. And, it came down to, when it came out, it was like this as far as the, I'm sitting there, sorry, I'm pointing here to the TV versus here. When it came out of the CNC, it looked like this, and realizing initially that was my goal. I was gonna, then just code it, but it needed more once we got to that point, and so we broke out. He was like, you can use this here torch, and I was like, I've never done that before, but let's go. It was kind of a seemingly a risky moment, but yeah. So this is me essentially using the torch, shading in Malcolm's face there, and then adding the dye. Sorry, moving quickly. Yeah, so I was pretty excited and pleased with it, and since then I bought a torch to play with at home. So this is to show that it actually did work once we put it up. That was always going to be the big question: was would it move when trying to make this type of puzzle? What we didn't think about or realize was that our construction was getting a little heavier and heavier, and in the midst of it, actually, my partner moved a little too quickly, and a piece dropped, and I had to stash my hand away, and it still pinched me, and I was like, yeah, we got to lock this bad boy down because this is going to take a kid's finger off, or hopefully not. But so anyway, now we locked it so that it can't move, but you got to have evidence that you succeeded. So this work again is taking one of my cityscapes, older body of work I was previously doing, and incorporating it into a rec center at Kenilworth, DC. And that was more straightforward, acrylic on MDF. Let's see. And here, this is where Rhonda and I collaborated. And Rhonda told us to talk about clients' issues and things like that, and really just the outside voice. And Rhonda was a heavy, pushing me to move forward with contemporizing. Is that yeah? That's it. All right. This idea and this body of work, because it was based off of previous work called Fluctuations, and in the process, so it's one of those moments where it's great to have an outside voice kind of looking at your work, because I was very much stuck on this aesthetic and this older, making it look old and making it look like it lived a life previously. And so even in my samples I was producing in metal, it still had these markings, it still had that age to it. And Rhonda was like, I forgot exactly what she said, but just she just kept pushing it. So no, not quite, and I'm like, I don't really know where we're going with this. But then once it clicked, it hit, and then I'm playing, the finish became more of a part of it, and angling the boxes, and we can do this and we can do that to make it have this similar feel to what I was aiming toward. And so just that idea of being open for the collaboration process, even in the fabrication is another aspect of collaboration. Here I was working with Unique Ironworks, I think their name is, right behind the Easy Storage Studios, kind of right in that area. Previously on the Malcolm X one, I was working with Jumbi Industries, who are great fabricators. They do a lot of work around the, in and around the area. Let's see. And so this is a piece recently collaborating with a friend of mine who we've been working together for years. We went to undergrad together, and he's grown into his art practice being more graphic design based. And so this is for McFarland Middle School. We had 3 walls to do. And at the time, I'd also won 3 other contracts, or 2 other contracts. This part had 3 parts to it, 3 walls to it. And so, we're focusing on this wall, the other one, 3 walls for this school, and then 2 other projects. So the idea of collaboration, really came into play here, needing to just kind of be more as an artistic director, which again is kind of a new aspect of my practice. But I mean, he's great. So we did this. We wallpapered it, printed it on canvas, and wallpapered it to a drywall surface that we had built out, so that it had a little bit of a dimension to it. And so this was the third one. While he's doing the graphic design work, I'm in the studio building the hands for this project, and we're going back and forth, working out the design aspect of everything. So we're just working on multiple things, kind of talking about one piece to the next. And he actually designed this piece based on my artwork. So he's like, give me some hands, and so I did a bunch of contour line drawings of hands, and scanned them, sent it to him. Let's get some artwork for the background. So I did some freehand kind of mental exercise that we used to do when he lived here. He actually lives in LA now, so this was the other aspect, is we're communicating via FaceTime and all types of things, and so he took basically taking my artwork and then designing around that, which was pretty amazing. And then so once he gave me came back with the product, which was this look, I was like, okay, bet, now we're going to take these hands and we're just going to like push them off the wall. And he's like, what do you mean? For him it was all flat, we're going to paint this. And I was like, no, we got to give them something else, like so that when that kid that's walking down the hall on the way to the bathroom and just drags his hands along the wall, his hands will go up and down over top of these hands. And he's like, oh man, like I love that. And so again, it was it was the challenge. You got to make these things fun, right? And kind of incorporating into just what you want to do. My personal work, it deals a lot more with just issues around blacks in America, right? Police violence and things of that nature. So doing stuff like this is kind of that that break from that more concentrated, serious work, and so allows you just to kind of break out and be fun. And so that's a huge aspect that I've grown to enjoy with taking on these public art projects in general. So that's a couple more of them. So at the same time of the hands, this is happening in the studio as well. And these are resin casted airplanes. And the idea, and so again, this idea of working, collaborating, and having a team. So obviously, like if I'm working on the hands, I have another partner of mine who's in the studio with me, and he's working out how we're going to make these planes at the same time. And so even on this one, I worked with Custom Works Maryland. I think Custom Works MD is their Instagram. A guy who came in and who I'd been talking with for a while and looking at his work, and he did the planets in the background there. And so these last 2 projects are actually what I'll walk through as far as the detail. I have more recent photos of, and so this is actually what the maquette looked like that I proposed to the panel. And so the idea of my initial idea was that we were going to take these planes, and they'd be flying off into a photo of the neighborhood behind the wall. And in the midst of it, the principal was like, nothing to do with your proposal here, but what do you think about space? And I was like, I like it. I don't know. And so he was like, I want a solar system. I was like, okay, So he liked the idea, but he had something that he needed to work with, and I was, and he's, it's his school, so I was completely open to it because I wanted the space. And they also had a situation where this is the mold making process. That's the first plane being poured with the resin. Let's see. Materials. So in the midst of making this, we actually had bought the wrong resin. And to do this project, we're buying gallons of this stuff, right? And so we have about like 5 of these 5-gallon resin containers, and not realizing like, oh, the difference in price was because they're not the same material. And so we built, Alonzo Robles Gordon, who's another artist here in the city who works with me in the studio. I mean, this bad boy is like, 48 inches long or so, right? And beautiful piece. And we couldn't use it because as it was sitting there, we came back from lunch and I'm like, wasn't that wing a little higher? And realized that the weight of it was starting to sink because this was regular art resin that was like more for the surface tops versus casting resin, right? And so fortunately we were able to return a lot of that, only to then buy the right material. So I insert this for just that idea of material importance, right? So this is showing that in the midst of while we're making this, we're negotiating that, realizing that the who is it? Not the principal at this point, but whoever one of the contractors is like, yeah, can you go off on the wall, onto the sides of the wall, right? And initially the proposal was like, you have the space of the stairwell and you have the front wall. I asked if we could get the side, and they were like, no. And then of course now once we're working, they're like, how about those sides? So we kind of worked that in by getting the scaffolding for free. It was kind of a trade-off in that sense. So this was apparently a $6,000 scaffold build that was not what I had budgeted for, and not at all what my mind was picturing when I was going to create the scaffolding, which was nowhere near as safe as what this was. So, once he showed me this, I was like, you got it. Because I didn't know how I was really going to install these planes, hanging over the stairs, right? So that was the final, that's again was the final outcome. I've been getting back to these. So this is what my studio. So my studio is a garage right now, and so this is what it started out looking like. We're full in there, taking you from one step to the next for the one hand. And so this is actually Habitat Black Fire Safe, and it's a smooth-on product that is used at like museums or like zoos outdoors. It has the hardness is like a construction hardness to it, so it's durable, safe for kids, to be around, and then the fire safe aspect allowed it to be safe for to be in schools. And so this is kind of like the panoramic view of the studio, just so you can see how hectic it is. And so you can actually see the plane, one of the planes, that's the prototype being worked on. And this is what there was originally a 3-dimensional sun in the corner that later got canceled from the final. So it's all happening at the same time. And that's for Oohs and Ahs, my daughter holding up the maquette of the hand, and then my son doing the same that they took and painted. So this is the wall, what it looked like prior to, and then in the process. So yeah, that is essentially it for me.
So Wesley, also, can you talk about your company? You have a fine art installation company as well, Artist Eye. Can you kind of speak to that and how that relates to the work that you're doing and your total process?
So the main thing, so I've had this art installation company since about 2007, and primarily doing residential and commercial spaces. But from a creation standpoint, it's helped amazingly, because now that's one of the first things I think about when creating a piece is how is it going to be installed and who can install it. It shouldn't be something where you have to always hire a specialist, right? But it should always be considered. And so that's probably one of the major aspects when I'm always thinking about is where are the cleats going to go, or how is this going to attach to a wall. So that's probably one of the biggest things I've tried to communicate to other artists as they're creating and learning new processes, because realizing that because of the collaboration aspect, these are new materials that you might be working with. And you can't be afraid of them, but the first thing we have to think about is how is this going to be attached, because it can't come off, right? That's lawsuits and injuries and all these types of things, right? So that's probably, as an art installer, that's probably one of the first things that comes to mind. And as an art installer, I've seen it not come to mind for many an artist as I'm trying to install it. I'm trying to think how else that really plays into it. That's probably the biggest thing.
That's good. All right, so why don't we open the floor up for questions? Please come to the mic if you have any questions.
Hi, Wesley. Great stuff. I wanted to ask you on the Martin Luther King, I'm sorry, the Malcolm X board, the puzzle, the CNC cutter, what was that cutting? Were those wood panels or? Curious. I see this as foam, but
right.
That looks like you wouldn't be burning the foam. So.
No. So yeah, it was wood panels. I forgot exactly what type of wood. It was dimensional lumber from kind of like Home Depot, just planed out. But yeah, stacked on top and glued multiple times.
So I have a couple of questions. So you alluded to some of it here, but how do you deal with project overruns? And like, say, for instance, you can maybe anticipate that you might need real shark's teeth, but you may not be able to anticipate, like on major projects, you don't plan out everything in advance. So how would you deal with that? And then how do you handle, how are payment schedules worked on, do you get some money up front and payment at the end? And then have you ever experienced any penalties for things going wrong?
You want to jump in on that? Shark teeth? I don't know about shark teeth.
Yeah, I guess I think the first question was about unexpected things happening. So once again, the listing of all the visualizing the process and going through in your mind and listing in type as in the contract of what needs to happen, and when the unexpected thing comes up, to help negotiate the budget that covers it somehow. Maybe there's something that can be shifted in the budget. Maybe we spend less money on the finish and more on the material, or who knows. I can't remember the second part of that question, though.
Well, there was also, as far as the payment schedule, of late, the contracts I've been dealing with is, either you're getting half up front and then quarter and a quarter. And it's either like quarter when the piece is finished and then the last quarter when it's installed. Although oftentimes that actually just ends up being half and half, because you're finishing a piece and installing it pretty much right away. So I've not had a piece where I've had to hold it for a while. Another thing about in terms of the overruns in the budget, making sure you're trying to in the budget when possible to add in that extra 10% or something for the unknowns, like having to rebuy resin or things like that. Because actually, so in that instance, for instance, we bought both the wrong resin and the wrong mold material. We bought composite mold instead of the silicone mold, and the composite started melting from the epoxy, drying. So, but yeah, just adding that extra money into the budget for the who knows, when possible. You did ask one other thing.
There was one other.
I fortunately haven't had to deal with the penalty thing, so I'm not sure.
So-
We usually make things happen, so it usually comes out well. I can't think of how to answer that.
Yeah.
So instead of penalties, so with, especially with art in public places, you're dealing with a project team and architects and general contractors. They could be presumed to be penalties, but they're project changes. And anytime you have a change in a direction, there's a cost factor. And so it's very important, particularly the artists and whoever you're working with that's kind of facilitating your role with the contractors or general construction team, that there's a clear understanding. And Alan and I went back and forth on the New Carrollton Branch project. There really needs to be a very, very clear understanding for the expectations of not just the project team, the client, but also the artist's expectation. Because anytime you veer away from what was originally agreed to, there is a cost involved to make that change.
I'd like to add that we're small shops. We got our families in there, and we're trying to get things done and to schedule big projects that sometimes are held up by completely unforeseen things that can drag out for years sometimes. I've had 6-year projects like, oh my God, next month we can get started on this. Year later, they're like, hey, that thing we needed to get done, we need to start that now. And then there's a hold. And then, boy, trying to schedule this for any sort of lifestyle, like work-life balance, is crazy. So one of the things I've learned is when I budget things to put a definite deadline on the estimate. Like, this is good for 30 days. Because right now we have an opening for this, so I can give you a decent price because we actually need work. I have, on the discovery job, I had 10 people, and we need to keep busy and keep going. And when that expires, then it's possible. Like right now, there's like 6 things going on right now. There's no way I can schedule anything in the next 3 or 4 months, but it's a project-to-project thing. And maybe our collaboration will work at a good time where there's a 6 months window where we just can focus on it. But more often than not, we're double booking and triple, quadruple, like managing the projects while we're trying to put the RFP out. So all those hats, Judy. Really, some are really small, and we have to count on other people with better skills. So.
2 points. One, a plea which we heard Jennifer Gibson talk about yesterday: document your as-builts and installation notes, because the number of times I've had to deinstall a piece of art and I can't find the fasteners because they're hidden under plugs or inserts, or it's blind pinned through the wall or something. So documenting how the art was installed is very important for future deinstallation or future conservation and repairs. The other thing is, you guys have been mentioning tons of names of fabricators and custom building shops. Is there a resource for finding a fabricator? Because sometimes I need to find somebody who can weld Corten or who can carve a replacement chunk of a wooden statue, and I don't know where to start to find that kind of a skill set. So is there some online resource? Is there a website or a book for fabricators in the DC area or something like that?
I've not found it. Alonzo and I we just scour the internet and make calls.
Yeah, I gotta say that was one of the things I was thinking about when giving the presentation. Like, I want to encourage everyone that what we're doing is pretty much what you also are doing. We are on the internet. We are calling our friends. Oh, remember that guy that did? And then hey, I know someone that does concrete, and so it's an amazing collaboration.
And one other thing too to add to that is the idea of getting quotes for your project is a hassle, and which I understand from the business side. I hate giving quotes just because it's more admin work and takes me, outside the studio or what have you. But we're doing the same thing to to the fabricators essentially. And the guy that actually did the Malcolm X piece on the CNC, I'd actually gone to him first for the entire project, and he actually did the my scale model. But then I couldn't get a hold of him to do the actual finished piece. So when I found Jay from Jumbi Industries, I'll say it again, he's out of Gaithersburg, good guy.
Second that.
You've worked with Jay? Okay. He actually then went to the same guy, to get it done, and he was like, "Oh, I remember this project." He He was like, "Yeah, well, should have took it," But so it's weird how that comes around to the same people again too. So.
I have a quick question for Wesley. Rhonda mentioned that you had an installation business. Do you still have that business?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So we can get your
We
card.
use it.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
A lot.
great. And also, would that include sort of like if we artists have questions about sometimes materials that you mentioned a few of them, would you be able to give us some of that
Oh
information
yeah, absolutely.
too? Okay,
Absolutely.
great. Thank
I'll
you.
have my cards ready.
Okay, thank you.
I haven't had one yet, but I will soon. So,
Yeah.
yeah, for artists, I haven't charged. For residents, type stuff, then that's different. But yes,
I
free
like
for
to
those
say
here.
that I'll talk for free, but as soon as I have to draw or find a supply, that's where we're hired.
Yeah.
This question's for both of you, and you have a major fabrication place and you have your garage. But going back to sort of earlier in your career when you were just starting out, how do you, I thought about this for this piece, you're like, well, we've never done this before. When you're putting that proposal together to do something like this, how do you sell the fact, because I'm a maker, and I know I can do it, but how do you convince the client that even though you don't have something like that in your portfolio, that you're capable of following through on the job?
Right. So, for instance, I'll say one thing about that is trying to be as familiar with the materials as possible. And so, with this, for instance, the Habitat Black, I didn't have a project on this scale that showed that or used, but I had used it on my personal work, and so I was able to at least show a sculpture that I had created with it, so they could at least see, that I can use the material. And frankly, a lot of the people there, also brought samples of it in, and so took it and banged on the table with it so that they could feel it, see it, and at least so that way you're selling them on the material. And and then you're showing just past work that you've created, that you can create things, period. That's how I've, when I was starting.
Yeah, and I similarly, I can show people my first stainless steel project was like this 16-foot horse. Like my first wood carving project might have been a 3,000-pound crocodile. So it's not the newness of the material; it's application of design, finding the resources. I found someone to help me put together a giant crocodile body in block form, and then I carved it into the shape. So knowing what my thing is, what their thing is, and working together, get it done. And pretty much you do have to sell the invisible. And we get a lot of calls, I'm sure, that just say, how much is this very sketchy idea? Can you just give me a number? And I'm like, well, no, you can't unless we start talking about what is going on. So it's obviously more helpful to get as much detail as possible on the thing, but who's paying for the design of this thing before we get a number to it? Well, that's this weird catch-22. Like everything's a catch-22. Like having the experience to do the next project is a bit of a stretch. So everyone is stretching. I want to help all of us stretch together.
I think we have time for one last question. Thank you.
I have a question. Wesley, I heard you talk about your own work, and then you have this work that you do. Have you found that there is that it makes it difficult for your fine art? And I'm asking this because I've seen situations where galleries will say to an artist, if you do this, not in here. Is that starting to break down that that wall between the fine art world and the public art? Do
So
you know what I'm talking about?
yeah,
That's an
yeah, yeah.
excellent question.
Yeah, and that's hard because I've not had an issue with it thus far. Because most of my art has been created, let's say in the fine art world, and for the gallery situation, and so this aspect is pretty new. But no, I think for me the work is very different, and so I don't think I've not had an issue with it. It's not. Yeah, it's not.
All right. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. Great information. So now we are breaking for lunch. 10 minutes. Please come back. We have an exciting presentation from Victor. So lunch is located as it was yesterday in the break. And bring your lunch back here to eat.
Calm, collected voice.